This story follows Theseus, a young prince whose life is shaped by prophecy, danger, and a destiny he never asked for. You'll travel beside him as he uncovers hidden truths, faces impossible trials, and descends into the twisting darkness of the labyrinth. But before he confronts the Minotaur, Theseus must confront himself. Across 11 chapters, each 1,000 words long, you'll feel his fears, hopes, and growing courage. You'll witness the schemes of kings, the whispers of gods, and the small choices that spark great legends. By the end, you won't just watch Theseus fight the Minotaur. You'll understand what drove him into the maze, and what allowed him to rise from it reborn. Hello, welcome to my channel. Before we start, it's a good idea to get into bed and relax. I would also like to ask you to subscribe to my channel, like it, and write in the comments where you are from and what time it is. Thank you. Have a nice viewing. Theseus had always believed the sea carried answers. As a boy in Trozen, he would stand barefoot on the cliffs, watching waves crash beneath him while questions crashed inside his chest. His mother Aethra often found him there, staring at the horizon as if it were a doorway rather than a distant line. On the morning his life began to shift, she approached with a firmness he rarely saw. "Theseus," she said, "it is time you learned the truth about your father." The boy's heart thudded. He had spent years imagining who the man might be. A warrior, a sailor, perhaps even a wandering hero blessed by the gods. Aethra led him to a quiet grove where ancient stones ringed a clearing. The air smelled of pine and memory. She told him of a king named Aegis, of a secret union, and of a test left for a child not yet grown. Beneath a heavy boulder, she said, waited a sword and sandals, proof of his royal blood. "These are yours if you can lift the stone," she explained. Her voice trembled with pride and worry. Theseus stared at the slab, feeling its weight even before touching it. Still, he knelt, pressed his palms to the cold surface, and pulled with every thread of strength coiled in his limbs. The stone shifted, only slightly at first, then with a groan like the earth complaining. He heaved again, teeth clenched, breath burning. Dust clouded the air as the slab tipped aside. Beneath it lay the gleam of a sword and the worn leather straps of ancient sandals. His hands shook as he lifted them. "These belong to your father," Aethra whispered. "Now they belong to you. You must journey to Athens. Claim your place beside King Aegis." Theseus felt the enormity of her words. Prince, future king, son of a man he had never seen. The sea breeze chilled him despite the sun overhead. But destiny rarely arrives without shadows. Bandits infested the roads to Athens, preying on travelers who strayed from safety. Aethra knew the hazards well. "You could sail," she urged. "The land route is dangerous." Yet Theseus, newly awakened to heroism, refused the easy path. "If I am to be a king's son," he said, "let me prove worthy." The first threat came sooner than expected. Near a narrow pass, he encountered Periphetes, the club-bearer, a giant of a man known for crushing victims with an iron cudgel. Periphetes mocked Theseus's youth, but the boy stood firm. When the bandit swung, Theseus dodged, seized an opening, and drove forward with precise force. The battle was fierce but brief. When it ended, Periphetes lay defeated, and Theseus lifted the iron club as his own trophy. He had survived his first trial, though the victory left him shaken. Strength had guided him, but also something else, something deeper, a clarity that sharpened in danger. As he continued, tales of his journey spread quicker than he traveled. At the wicked inn of Sinis the Pine Bender, where travelers were torn apart by bent trees, Theseus confronted the cruel man and turned his own method against him. Rumors carried this news like wind. A new hero walked the roads of Greece. Still, the path was long. Each night Theseus camped beneath stars that glittered with distant stories. He wondered which of them belonged to him. If the gods watched, or if they merely admired the persistence of mortals struggling upward through fate's thick shadows. On the third week of travel, near the cliffs of Crommyon, he fought the monstrous sow that terrorized the region. Its tusks were long as daggers and its hide thick as old shields. The battle carved sweat lines down his brow. Yet he pushed forward, heart steady, blade flashing. When the beast fell, he stood panting but proud. Yet victory did not harden him. As he trekked onward, he shared food with farmers, helped repair a wheel for a merchant, and carried a wounded traveler to safety. Theseus discovered that heroism was not measured only by slaying monsters. It lived in small moments where courage met kindness. But danger found him again on the outskirts of Megara, where Siren forced travelers to wash his feet before kicking them from cliffs. Theseus confronted him with calm intensity. When Siren lunged, Theseus anticipated the motion, reversed it, and sent the brute tumbling into the sea he had used as a weapon for years. By the time Athens appeared on the horizon, Theseus had shed the last remnants of boyhood. His muscles bore the memory of battles, his eyes the weight of choices. Every step toward the city made his heart thrum with new uncertainty. How would his father greet him? As a stranger, or as a long-awaited son? Athens bustled with life when he entered. Merchants shouted from stalls, children darted between columns, and priests tended to shrines that perfumed the air with incense. Theseus moved through the streets with humble awe, but whisper followed whisper. Word of the hero who had slain bandits on the road had reached even here. He soon found himself standing before the palace. Great marble pillars rose like frozen waves, and guards eyed him with suspicion. "State your purpose," one demanded. Theseus held the sword he had retrieved from beneath the boulder, its gleam a quiet announcement. "I am Theseus," he said, "son of Aegis." Inside, the king studied him with furrowed brows, unaware that destiny walked toward him in youthful form. Aegis's advisor Medea, who practiced subtle arts, sensed danger. She whispered poison into the king's ear, urging him to distrust the stranger. Her motives were tangled in ambition and fear. Aegis, uncertain but swayed by her counsel, invited Theseus to a banquet. Medea planned silently to dispose of him there, hiding her intentions behind a mask of courtesy. But Theseus felt the tension coiling in the room. Heroes quickly learn to read danger, no matter how sweetly it's wrapped. The truth revealed itself when wine was poured and a dagger glinted beneath Medea's cloak. Before she could act, Theseus placed the sword of Aegis upon the table. Recognition washed over the king. His face softened, joy cracking through years of regret. "My son," he breathed, pulling Theseus into an embrace. Theseus remained in the palace that evening, still overwhelmed by the sudden shift from outcast stranger to recognized prince. Aegis clung to him as if afraid he would vanish again, touching the sword's hilt repeatedly, as though confirming its reality. Servants whispered through the corridors, spreading word that the king's long-lost son had returned. Yet beneath the celebration, Theseus sensed a stirring unease, the faint whisper of threads tightening in the loom of fate. The source of that unease was Medea. Though exposed and thwarted, she did not depart quietly. Her eyes followed Theseus with a mixture of fury and calculation, shimmering like coals that refused to die. Later that night she approached Aegis privately, weaving a new tale. Athens faced a dire threat, she claimed, and Theseus, inexperienced despite his triumphs, was unprepared for the burden of the crown. Her words slithered into the king's doubts, urging him to test his son further. Aegis, torn between joy and caution, summoned Theseus the next morning. He spoke of a wild bull ravaging the countryside of Marathon, a beast powerful enough to overturn chariots and scatter soldiers. "If you are truly ready," Aegis said gently, "then subdue the bull and return to us unharmed." The requests done, Theseus had hoped for trust, not another trial, but he bowed his head with quiet resolve. Heroes do not choose their tests, they rise to meet them. The journey to Marathon led Theseus through rolling fields and groves where farmers worked anxiously under the cloud of fear. As he passed, they offered warnings, describing the creature's fury. Hooves that cracked earth, horns that split wooden carts, eyes burning with the madness of a beast shaped by divine wrath. Yet their fear only strengthened Theseus's purpose. He had carved a path through the dangers of the road. He would not falter now, not when Athens needed proof of his strength. He found the bull near a marshy field ringed with trampled reeds. The beast stood massive and trembling with wild energy, its breath steaming in the morning chill. When it spotted Theseus, it lowered its head and charged with terrifying speed. He dodged aside, rolling through the mud, feeling the thunder of hooves shaking the ground. The bull wheeled, snorting clouds of rage. Theseus tightened his grip on its mane during the next pass, muscles screaming as he held on while the beast spun in fury. The struggle raged across the field, man and monster locked in a dance of strength and defiance. Theseus dug his heels into the earth, forcing the bowl back step by step. With a final heave, he wrestled it to the ground, pinning its neck against the soil. The beast's roars faded into weary huffs, and slowly its resistance ceased. Theseus bound it with thick rope, guiding it back to Athens amid a growing procession of astonished spectators who followed, cheering as word spread ahead of him like wildfire. When Theseus entered the city leading the bowl, the people erupted into celebration. Children ran beside him, merchants tossed garlands, and elders clasped his hands with trembling gratitude. Aegis, moved beyond measure, embraced his son before the entire crowd. Medea, witnessing her influence shatter, slipped away from the steps of the palace. By sunset she was gone from Athens entirely, fleeing to lands where her venomous plots might survive. Theseus felt a heavy weight lift from the city with her departure. Yet victory brought no rest. As the celebrations faded, Theseus overheard whispers of a darker sorrow woven into Athenian life, an old treaty with Crete. Every 9 years, the city owed a terrible tribute. 7 young men and 7 maidens sent across the sea, condemned to perish in the labyrinth beneath King Minos' palace. And at the heart of that twisting maze lurked the Minotaur, the monstrous son of Queen Pasiphae. With the body of a man and the head of a bull, a terror that devoured all sent to it. Theseus confronted Aegis that night, demanding answers. The king, shoulders heavy with remorse, confessed that Athens had once angered Minos by causing the death of his beloved son Androgeos. To prevent war, they agreed to the dreadful tribute. I have lived with this shame, Aegis whispered, praying each cycle that Crete might show mercy, but they never have. His voice cracked. The next tribute is due in mere days. Theseus felt his blood turn cold, yet his resolve crystallized instantly. I will go, he declared. I will join the 14 and end this torment. Aegis's face paled, his mouth opening in protest, but Theseus raised a hand. If I am your son, if I am Athens' prince, then let me face the monster you fear. Let the city see we no longer bow to Crete. The king trembled, torn between terror and pride. But at last he nodded, placing a hand on Theseus's shoulder as though memorizing the shape of his son's strength. The chosen youths gathered at the harbor days later, their faces shadowed by dread. Parents wept beside ships painted with black sails, symbols of doom. Theseus walked among them, offering calm words and gentle confidence. Though fear churned beneath his ribs, he refused to let it show. Courage, he had learned, often begins as a gift given to others before it becomes truth within oneself. His presence steadied them like an anchor against a rising storm. Before departing, Theseus embraced Aegis on the stone quay. The king clutched him desperately, whispering one final plea. If Theseus survived, he must change the ship's sails from black to white on his return. Let me know from afar that you live, Aegis murmured, tears streaking his cheeks. Theseus promised, wiping the king's face with the corner of his cloak. Neither spoke the fear that hovered unspoken, the fear that the sails might remain black forever. As the ship left the harbor, oars dipping in rhythmic arcs, Theseus watched the cliffs of Athens recede. The sea spread out before them, deceptively calm, its shifting colors mirroring the uncertainty within him. He stood at the prow, fingers curled around the railing, imagining the labyrinth he had yet to face. A maze designed to confuse the mind, to trap the spirit, to break hope until only fear remained. And within it waited a creature born of punishment and rage, a living embodiment of chaos. But Theseus did not fear the Minotaur alone. He feared failing the young Athenians who followed him, their lives entrusted to his courage. He feared failing his father, who had already lost so much. And yet, amid these fears, a quiet flame of determination burned. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what it meant to carry a city's hope. The journey to Crete would test him far beyond monsters and mazes. It would test the very core of who he was and who he wished to become. The voyage to Crete stretched across days of shifting seas and restless thoughts. The youths aboard tried to pass time with games or quiet songs, but fear lingered like a stubborn mist. Theseus moved among them with steady composure, offering reassurance whenever despair pressed too close. At night, he stood alone at the stern, watching moonlight ripple on the water, imagining the winding corridors of the labyrinth waiting like a living puzzle beneath the Cretan palace. When Crete finally rose from the horizon, its cliffs looked like the teeth of a sleeping giant gnawing at the sea. The harbor bustled with soldiers and slaves preparing for the grim ceremony. King Minos himself awaited their arrival, standing tall in gleaming armor, his expression sharp with pride. Though he greeted the Athenians with rehearsed politeness, Theseus sensed hostility beneath every word. Minos looked upon them not as people, but as payment, tokens to feed his monstrous problem. The chosen youths were escorted through the palace, passing halls decorated with scenes of ancient victories. Drums echoed faintly, a reminder of the culture's reverence for strength. Yet even in that grandeur, an air of unease clung to the walls. Servants walked quickly, avoiding eye contact, as though any mention of the labyrinth might summon its horrors. Theseus observed everything: the twisting corridors, the guarded doors, the subtle tension trembling beneath the island's polished beauty. That night, in a courtyard lit by oil lamps, Theseus encountered Princess Ariadne. She watched him from behind a pillar, curiosity brightening her eyes. When she stepped forward, her voice trembled not with fear, but urgency. She had heard whispers about him, the prince who chose danger willingly. She confessed her hatred of the tribute and the suffering it caused. "The labyrinth devours hope," she said softly. "But you might survive. And I cannot bear to watch more innocents perish." Ariadne revealed she wished to help him escape the maze. She described its endless corridors, its shifting turns, its cruel design that erased all sense of direction. Without guidance, no one could return. Then she produced a ball of tightly wound thread. "Tie this at the entrance," she explained, her hands shaking slightly, "and unwind it as you go. It will lead you back, if you live long enough to use it." Her courage moved Theseus deeply, for it risked her life as much as his. Before dawn, she led him to a hidden chamber where a priestess blessed his resolve with ancient words. Ariadne pressed the thread into his palm once more, holding his gaze. "Do not lose yourself in the dark," she whispered. Theseus nodded, promising silently that he would honor her trust. Even as guards approached to escort the captives, he tucked the thread beneath his cloak, feeling its presence like a lifeline binding him to hope and a place built to erase it. The entrance to the labyrinth yawned like the mouth of an ancient beast carved into the earth. Stone walls rose in jagged shapes, and the air smelled cool and stale, as though it had forgotten sunlight. The Athenians trembled behind Theseus, praying the gods might look kindly upon them. He tied Ariadne's thread to a carved pillar at the doorway, then stepped into the darkness with measured breaths. Each footstep echoed as if the maze listened, waiting for its new prey. Inside, the corridors twisted with unnatural sharpness. The walls seemed to pulse with subtle vibrations, guiding sound strangely, warping distance in ways that disoriented the mind. Torches flickered wildly, their flames stretched by drafts that came from nowhere. Theseus kept one hand on the thread, letting it unspool behind him while the other traced the rough stone. His senses sharpened with every step, listening for hints of movement, breathing, scraping, anything that might betray the Minotaur's presence. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. Time dissolved in the maze. He discovered rooms filled with bones, remnants of past victims, and markings scratched into the walls by desperate hands. Yet amid the despair, he pressed onward, guided by purpose stronger than fear. At last, a low rumble vibrated through the stone, followed by a deep snort that chilled the air. The Minotaur was near. Theseus steadied his breath, gripping his weapon tightly as the sound of heavy hooves approached. The creature emerged from a shadowed archway, towering, broad-shouldered, its bull's head crowned with horns that scraped the ceiling. Its eyes burned with violent hunger, and each exhale steamed like smoke. For a heartbeat, Theseus felt its sheer power threaten to uproot his courage. But then he moved, dodging a furious charge that shattered the wall beside him. The battle began in a frenzy of echoes, clashing, stomping, roaring, reverberating through the labyrinth as if the maze itself rejoiced in the chaos. Theseus felt the Minotaur's rage shake the floor with every step. The creature moved faster than its massive body suggested, lunging with brutal strength meant to crush or impale. Theseus dodged left, then right, the beast's horns slicing the air with deadly precision. Sparks flew when its charge scraped the stone wall, leaving deep gouges. The prince circled carefully, keeping distance, studying the rhythm of its movements, watching for the slightest opening in its relentless fury. The Minotaur snorted violently and swung its head downward, forcing Theseus to leap aside as a horn grazed his arm, tearing fabric and skin. Pain flared, but he pushed it aside, driving his focus sharper. The beast's advantage was raw power, his was agility and thought. He baited it with quick steps, guiding it toward a narrow corridor where its size would become a weakness. Twice the Minotaur lunged, forcing its bulk through the tight passage, scraping stone as it pressed forward hungrily. Theseus waited until the creature wedged itself just slightly, enough to hinder its turning. Then he struck. His blade sliced across its shoulder, drawing a furious roar that echoed violently down the corridor. The Minotaur twisted, arms flailing with primal rage, trying to reach him. Theseus darted backward, panting, sweat dripping into his eyes. It was not enough to wound the beast. He needed a decisive moment. The monster's thrashing shook dust from the ceiling, and cracks splintered along the carved walls. For a moment, everything fell eerily still. The Minotaur locked eyes with him, the glow within them shifting from fury to something almost mournful. Theseus hesitated, struck by the fleeting glimpse of a tortured soul beneath the monstrous mask. But the moment vanished as the creature lunged again, breaking free from the narrow corridor with explosive strength. Stones shattered around it in a storm of debris. The prince rolled away, barely avoiding the crushing weight of a falling slab. Realizing hesitation could mean death, he retreated into a wider chamber. The Minotaur followed, blood streaking its fur, breaths ragged yet furious. Theseus gripped his sword tighter, inhaling deeply to steady his heartbeat. The chamber's faint torchlight cast long shadows across the beast's frame, giving it an almost mythical terror. But Theseus knew legends were shaped by those who overcame fear, not those consumed by it. He stepped forward boldly, forcing the Minotaur to react. The creature swung wildly, its heavy fists striking the ground hard enough to crack stone. Theseus darted in and slashed at its exposed flank, then escaped before the Minotaur could retaliate. The beast roared in pain, stumbling slightly as its strength waned. Theseus sensed the tide shifting. He feinted right, drawing the Minotaur's attention, then lunged left with full force. His blade drove deep into the creature's chest. The Minotaur bellowed a final, earth-shaking cry before collapsing to its knees. For a moment the labyrinth seemed to hold its breath. The Minotaur's massive form shuddered once, then stilled, its heavy body slumping against the floor. Theseus stepped back, chest heaving, covered in sweat, dust, and the dark blood of the fallen creature. He felt neither triumph nor relief, only a deep, echoing exhaustion. The Minotaur's death ended a cycle of suffering, yet sorrow lingered for what the monster must once have been, before fate twisted its life into terror. The silence of the labyrinth grew oppressive once the bottle's echoes faded. Shadows clung to the corners of the chamber, reminding him that victory meant nothing if he could not find the way out. He reached for the thread, still intact, still leading the way back through the maze. Wrapping a length around his wrist for security, he began retracing his path. Each step felt heavier as the adrenaline drained, leaving only the dull throb of wounds and the distant morning hum of the endless corridors. As he followed the thread through twisting passages, Theseus passed bones, claw marks, and the remnants of desperate struggles. But now the labyrinth no longer felt alive or hostile. It felt empty, stripped of the malevolent presence that once haunted it. When he reached the entrance chamber, a faint glow of daylight seeped through the doorway. He stepped into the open air, lungs filling with fresh wind as if tasting freedom for the first time. The surviving Athenians waited, hope flaring in their eyes. Ariadne stood among them, hands clasped tightly, her face pale with worry. When she saw Theseus emerge, thread trailing behind him like a victorious path, her breath caught. She rushed forward, tears glimmering, and he embraced her with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "You truly did it," she whispered. Behind them, the Athenians stared at him as though witnessing a miracle. For the first time in years, the tribute had not ended in tragedy. Theseus had broken Crete's curse, and forever changed his own destiny. Ariadne urged Theseus to leave Crete immediately, knowing her betrayal of Minos would soon be uncovered. The Athenians gathered at the harbor under her guidance, moving quickly through back alleys and servant routes she had memorized since childhood. Torches flickered on distant walls as guards patrolled, unaware of the escape underway. The ship waited in silence, tied loosely, as though holding its breath for the coming flight. Every second felt stolen, and danger loomed like a shadow behind them. When they finally pushed off from the shore, the oars dipping quietly into the dark water, Ariadne exhaled shaky relief. Minos' palace grew smaller in the distance, black against the moonlit cliffs. She stood beside Theseus at the stern, the sea wind tugging at her hair. "He will hunt us," she murmured, "but he cannot undo what you've done." Theseus clasped her hand gently, grateful not only for her help, but for the courage that had guided her past fear and duty. The voyage toward freedom was long and restless. At night, the ship drifted beneath constellations that shimmered like watchful eyes. The Athenians slept in uneasy clusters, waking often from nightmares of the labyrinth. Theseus rarely slept, his mind replaying the Minotaur's final moments and the weight of each life he had saved. Ariadne stayed close, offering quiet company. Her presence steadied him, forming a fragile sense of peace after days of turmoil. They reached the island of Naxos at dawn, its sandy shores glowing under the rising sun. Exhausted and aching, the group decided to rest, gathering food and fresh water. Theseus wandered inland with Ariadne, the palms swaying gently above them. She spoke of dreams she never dared reveal in Crete, life free from her father's rule, a future shaped by her choices rather than the kingdom's demands. Theseus listened, imagining what such freedom might look like for them both. But as evening fell, a heavy weariness settled over him, a weight he could not explain. Legends later claimed the god Dionysus visited Theseus in sleep, demanding Ariadne be left on Naxos, for she was destined to become his divine bride. Whether dream or enchantment, Theseus awoke with his heart clouded by confusion. Torn between love and a force he could not fight, he made the painful choice to depart while Ariadne slept peacefully by the shore, unaware of the tide turning against her. Before dawn, the Athenians quietly boarded the ship. Theseus stood at the water's edge for a long moment, guilt twisting inside him. Leaving Ariadne felt like a betrayal equal to any mythic tragedy. Yet something beyond mortal reasoning pulled at him. As the ship drifted away, he watched her small figure curled in the sand, the morning light creeping toward her. He whispered a prayer that the gods would care for her better than Crete ever had, and better than he had managed in this moment. The sea carried them onward, but Theseus's heart was restless. Days blurred in the rhythm of oars, wind, and longing. The Athenians rejoiced in their survival, unaware of the storm brewing in their hero's thoughts. He wrestled with regret, replaying Ariadne's trust and sacrifice. Yet duty tugged him forward. Athens awaited their return, and with it the promise he had made to his father. But even duty could not silence the guilt that clung to him like sea mist. As they neared Athens, excitement spread among the crew. The familiar cliffs, the whitewashed temples, the winding coastline, all rose from the horizon like a promise of home. In the rush of preparations and celebration, Theseus forgot the single detail that mattered most: the sails. Still black, they announced tragedy instead of triumph. Lost in thought and exhaustion, he failed to remember his father's plea, the simple signal that would spare Aegis from despair. Aegis stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, watching the approaching ship with desperate hope. His eyes strained for the flash of white that would mean his son lived. But when he saw only black sails cutting through the waves, his heart shattered. Believing Theseus dead, he stepped toward the edge, grief overwhelming every other instinct. The wind howled around him as he fell, his sorrow swallowed by the sea that would forever bear his name. When the ship docked, the cheers of the Athenians slowly faded as word spread of the king's death. Theseus, stunned and crushed by guilt, rushed to the cliffs too late. The weight of his victory collapsed beneath the weight of his loss. Though he had saved Athens from the Minotaur, he had lost the man who waited a lifetime to know him. With heavy heart and mournful resolve, Theseus accepted the crown, its burden shaped as much by triumph as by tragedy. The deeper Theseus moved, the narrower the stone arteries became, as though the labyrinth itself tried to squeeze the courage out of him. Every step echoed strangely, splitting into layers of sound that bounced back from unseen corridors. He tightened his grip on the sword, letting Ariadne's thread guide him through the growing darkness. A warm gust of air brushed his face, carrying the smell of damp fur and something metallic. It was the first true sign that he was nearing the heart of the maze. The walls vibrated faintly, as if some colossal heartbeat pulsed beyond the next turn. Theseus felt sweat on his brow but refused to slow down. Suddenly the ground trembled. A deep, resonant stomp that seemed far too heavy for any human creature. Theseus froze, listening. Another stomp, then a sharp exhalation, half growl and half snort, shook the corridor. The Minotaur was close. The hero steadied his breath, calming his racing pulse. He rounded a bend and found himself in a cavernous chamber lit by a thin shaft of light leaking from cracks above. Bones littered the floor, some crushed, some torn clean in half. Claw marks scarred the stone pillars, and in the center, hunched and trembling with fury, stood the monstrous being he had come to face. The Minotaur lifted its massive head, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. Its bull-like horns gleamed beneath the pale light, curving like blades of ivory. Muscles rippled beneath its dark hide, each movement radiating both strength and suffering. It let out a bellow that shook dust from the ceiling. Theseus felt the shockwave of the roar, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, raising his sword in a silent challenge. The beast stomped, lowered its head, and charged with terrifying force. The hero rolled to the side just in time, the horn slicing a chunk of rock where he had stood. The Minotaur skidded, grunted, and turned again with feral speed. Its hooves cracked the stone, sending fragments flying. Theseus circled carefully, watching for patterns in the creature's movements. It was powerful, but its rage made it predictable. Each charge followed the same rhythm of breath and tension. He waited until the next charge began, then darted behind a fallen pillar. The Minotaur slammed into it, shattering the stone into dust. The force staggered the beast, giving Theseus a fleeting opening. He rushed forward and struck its side, the blade cutting through thick hide. A roar of pain jolted the chamber. The Minotaur swung wildly, clawing at the air. Its strength was overwhelming, but its movements grew erratic. Theseus kept his distance, letting exhaustion do its work. Blood darkened the floor, forming a trail behind the wounded creature as it thrashed and snarled, refusing to fall. Using a moment of weakness, Theseus lunged and delivered a deep strike to its shoulder. The beast stumbled, collapsing onto one knee. It looked at him with eyes that flickered not only with rage, but with a strange, human sorrow. For a moment, the hero hesitated, seeing the tragedy beneath the monster's form. But hesitation would mean death. With a final push, Theseus drove his sword into the creature's heart. The Minotaur released a low, trembling exhale, more like a sigh than a roar. Its massive frame sank slowly to the ground, dust rising around it like a fading storm. The labyrinth fell eerily silent. Theseus stepped back, chest heaving. The oppressive weight of the maze seemed to lift, as though the creature's death loosened ancient chains. For the first time since entering, he felt the faint whisper of a fresh breeze drifting through the passageways. It was as if the underground world itself acknowledged his victory. He cleaned his blade and turned to the thread, still anchored near the entrance of the chamber. Its thin line stretched into the darkness, glowing slightly in the scattered light. Without it, he knew he'd be lost forever in the twisting labyrinth. With it, he could guide everyone to freedom. Retracing his steps, he followed the thread through the winding corridors. The air grew cooler, the walls less suffocating. Distant echoes of worried voices reached him. Other Athenians waiting for news, unsure if the hero had survived. Theseus quickened his pace, eager to end their torment. When he emerged from the final bend, Ariadne rushed forward. Relief washed over her face, her eyes glistening as she saw the blood on his sword and the surviving strength in his stride. "You did it," she whispered. Theseus nodded, though exhaustion weighed heavily on him. The nightmare was finally over. Theseus stood at the mouth of the labyrinth, blinking into the sunlight as though waking from a long, suffocating dream. The fresh air stung his lungs after hours of breathing dust and darkness. Behind him, the other Athenians gathered slowly, their faces pale yet bright with hope. They had expected death, not freedom. Ariadne stood nearest to him, hands trembling, her eyes searching his face as if to confirm he was truly alive. The news of the Minotaur's death traveled through the group like a spark jumping from one dry leaf to another. The Athenians murmured prayers of gratitude, some collapsing in relief, others staring at Theseus with awe usually reserved for legends instead of men. Yet the hero felt no triumph, only a heavy, lingering tiredness, as though the battle had stripped away a piece of him. Still, he straightened his shoulders, knowing they depended on him now more than ever. Ariadne stepped closer, her voice low. My father must not know what happened. If he discovers the creature is dead and the tribute escaped, he will unleash his fury on all of us. We must flee before he sends his guards. Theseus recognized the urgency in her words. Minos ruled Crete with iron certainty, and though the Minotaur had been his shame and his weapon, the king would sooner drown the island in blood than admit defeat. Together they led the group along hidden paths Ariadne knew from childhood, secluded stairways behind decaying walls, servant corridors rarely used except during festivals. Each step took them farther from the labyrinth and deeper into the shadowed edges of the palace grounds. Theseus kept his sword drawn, though his arm ached with every movement. He wondered how much time they had before Minos realized something had unraveled within his perfect order. When they reached the docks, dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. The sea shimmered like liquid bronze, waves rolling gently against the wooden planks. The Athenian ship, the one they had arrived on as sacrifices, sat tethered to the pier, guarded only by 2 dozing soldiers. The early hour had worked in their favor. With quick, silent motions, Theseus disarmed the guards before they could raise an alarm. The Athenians hurried aboard, their footsteps echoing across the deck. Ariadne paused at the edge of the gangplank, staring back at the towering palace in the distance. Once we leave, she whispered, I can never return. Her voice trembled not with fear but with the weight of irreversible choice. Theseus placed a hand over hers. You saved us all. Your future lies beyond Crete now. She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty, and stepped onto the ship. As the vessel pushed away from the dock, the cries of gulls mixed with the rustling wind. The oars dipped into the water in steady rhythm, pulling them farther from the island that had nearly consumed them. Ariadne stood beside Theseus, watching the shoreline recede. Her expression carried a strange mixture of relief and sorrow, as if she were shedding both chains and memories with each passing moment. But peace was short-lived. A distant horn blared from the palace walls, a sharp, unmistakable note of alarm. Minos had discovered their escape. Soon, tiny shapes began rushing across the piers, soldiers scrambling like ants disturbed from a nest. Arrows arced through the air, falling short but closing the distance with every volley. The Athenians rowed faster, muscles burning, sweat sliding down their backs. The Cretan ships emerged next, sleek war vessels built for speed, unfurling their dark sails as they gave chase. Theseus felt the tension spread through his crew like a cold ripple. The sea was wide, but their pursuers were relentless. He turned to Ariadne. Is there a cove or island we can reach before they catch us? She scanned the horizon, pointing toward a cluster of rocky outcroppings shrouded in morning mist. There, Naxos. If we reach it, we can hide among its cliffs. The journey toward Naxos became a desperate race. The wind whipped at the sails, waves slapping hard against the hull. Cretan shouts echoed across the water, growing louder. Theseus took the helm, guiding the ship between jagged rocks that threatened to tear it apart. The sailors followed his commands with unwavering trust, pushing through exhaustion and fear as if the sea itself demanded their strength. At last the cliffs of Naxos rose before them, towering stone columns that cast long shadows across the restless water. The Cretan ships hesitated, slowed by the treacherous terrain. Theseus maneuvered into a narrow inlet where their pursuers could not follow without risking destruction. One by one, the Athenians collapsed onto the sand, their bodies trembling with relief. They had escaped, if only for a moment. Ariadne wandered along the untouched shore, her feet tracing the damp sand. The sun had risen fully now, painting the cliffs with a golden glow. She seemed lost in thought, caught between the life she had abandoned and the one unfolding before her. Theseus approached, sensing the heaviness in her posture. You're safe now, he said softly. We'll rest here, gather strength, and then continue home. She looked up with a fragile smile. Home, she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. For years she had lived under her father's commands, bound to a fate she never chose. Now, standing beside Theseus, she felt both exposed and strangely free, as though she were stepping into sunlight for the first time. Yet a flicker of uncertainty lingered in her gaze, something the hero could not yet decipher. As the Athenians tended their wounds and prepared a small camp, Theseus walked the shoreline to scout their surroundings. The island seemed peaceful, but the labyrinth had taught him that danger could hide behind silence. He studied the cliffs, considering routes and possible threats. Every decision mattered now, not just for him, but for the lives of everyone who depended on him. When he returned, the group was resting, the sea humming gently behind them. Ariadne sat alone on a rocky ledge, her hair stirring in the wind. Theseus joined her, taking in the horizon. "We move at dusk," he said. "The Cretan ships may circle back, but by night the sea becomes our ally." Ariadne nodded, appearing calm, yet something unspoken trembled in her eyes, as though the island carried a secret neither of them yet understood. As dusk draped the island in violet haze, a strange stillness settled over Naxos. The Athenians gathered their belongings quietly, preparing to return to the ship once the sun disappeared behind the cliffs. Theseus walked among them, offering reassurance, though inside he felt an unfamiliar unease. The air carried a peculiar tension, as if the island itself were watching them, waiting for something unspoken to occur. Ariadne remained distant throughout the preparations, her gaze drifting toward the forested interior of Naxos. Several times she paused, as though listening to a voice none of the others could hear. Theseus noticed the subtle change in her demeanor, the way her steps slowed, the way her fingers tightened around a strand of her hair. He approached gently, sensing turmoil beneath her calm exterior. "Is something troubling you?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes flickering with uncertainty. "All my life," she whispered, "I believed leaving Crete would free me. But now, standing here, far from everything familiar, I fear I have traded one prison for another." Theseus felt the weight of her words. He knew the cost of freedom could sometimes feel heavier than the chains left behind. Yet before he could speak, Ariadne's gaze shifted past him, drawn to something unseen. From the shadows of the cliffs emerged a soft hum, a rhythm that blended with the rising tide. The sound was too melodic to be the wind, too deliberate to be an accident. Ariadne stiffened, breath-catching. Theseus turned toward the cliffs, gripping his sword instinctively. A faint glow flickered between the rocks, pulsing like a heartbeat. It grew brighter, revealing the silhouette of a figure stepping forward with graceful, measured steps. The stranger's presence radiated an otherworldly calm. Draped in shimmering robes that seemed woven from moonlight, he moved as though the earth itself cleared a path for him. The Athenians watched in stunned silence, instinctively recognizing divinity even before Theseus fully grasped it. The figure's eyes held both warmth and an ancient sadness, an expression both welcoming and inevitable. Ariadne's breath trembled as she whispered, "It's him." Dionysus, god of ecstasy and transformation, approached with a serene smile. "Ariadne," he said, his voice like distant chimes carried by the wind, "I have followed your sorrow across the seas. Fate has brought you here, to the place where your path truly begins." The Athenians fell to their knees, but Theseus remained standing, though weariness tightened every muscle in his body. Gods seldom appeared without purpose, nor without cost. Ariadne stepped forward slowly, her expression torn between awe and fear. "Why me?" she asked. "I am no priestess. I carry no divine blood." Dionysus extended his hand toward her, his glow illuminating her face. "You carry something far greater, the courage to defy your fate, and the compassion to save others from theirs. Such hearts do not escape the notice of gods." His words wrapped around her like a gentle current pulling her inward. Theseus stepped closer, unwilling to lose her to another destiny. "She is under my protection," he said firmly. Dionysus regarded him with a calm that revealed no offense, only understanding. "You have fulfilled your purpose, hero of Athens. But her path and yours are not the same. You seek glory upon the seas and in the halls of kings. She seeks freedom of a different kind, one you cannot grant her." Theseus felt a sting he could not name. Ariadne looked between them, her eyes wide and conflicted. She had risked everything to help Theseus. Yet now, faced with a god offering a future she never imagined, her heart quivered with uncertainty. "Theseus," she said softly, "I believed following you would lead me to the life I dreamed of. But now, I feel as though something calls me from deep within this island. Something that feels like truth." The hero's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to meet her gaze with honesty. "I cannot command your path. If you choose this god, or this island, I will not begrudge you. But know this, you saved my life and the lives of many. Whatever you choose, your courage will be remembered." He spoke the words steadily, though each syllable carved a quiet wound within him. He had hoped to take her home. not lose her on a foreign shore. Dionysus extended his hand once more, shimmering with soft light. Ariadne hesitated only a moment before placing her fingers in his. A wave of serenity washed over her, soothing the tremors in her chest. She turned back to Theseus, tears glistening. "Thank you for seeing me, for trusting me, for giving me a chance to escape my father's world." The wind carried her words like petals drifting away from shore. Theseus bowed his head, accepting her decision with the dignity of a hero who knew that victories often came with losses. "May your path bring you joy," he said quietly. Dionysus guided Ariadne toward the glowing arches of the cliffs, where the stone seemed to bend like fabric, revealing a hidden sanctuary filled with music and light. As they vanished into the radiance, the cliffs sealed behind them, leaving no trace of their passage. The Athenians stood in solemn silence, watching their princess disappear into a divine world none of them could follow. Only the whisper of waves broke the stillness. Theseus let out a long breath, feeling an ache settle behind his ribs, a mixture of grief, acceptance, and a warrior's resolve. There was no turning back. Ariadne had chosen her fate, and now he had to face his own. Night descended completely, wrapping Naxos in deep blue shadows. Theseus returned to the ship, his steps firm despite the weight in his chest. "We set sail," he said, his voice steady. The crew obeyed, understanding that grief could not outweigh the need to survive. They pushed the vessel from the shore, oars dipping into the dark water as the island grew smaller behind them. As Naxos faded into the distance, Theseus lifted his gaze to the stars. Their cold brilliance offered neither comfort nor guidance, only the reminder that every hero walked a path carved by both triumph and sacrifice. And though the sea stretched endlessly before him, he knew the journey home would test him in ways the labyrinth never could. The ship carved its way through the dark waters, guided only by starlight and the slow, steady rhythm of oars. The Athenians moved in silence, still shaken by the divine encounter on Naxos. Theseus stood near the bow, staring into the endless horizon. The salty wind cooled his face, but it could not ease the ache left by Ariadne's departure. Loss weighed on him, but duty pulled him forward like a persistent tide. As dawn began to color the sky, the sea shifted from black to shimmering gold. The world seemed calmer, as though the gods themselves had withdrawn for a time. A few sailors murmured respectfully around Theseus, offering food and water, but he accepted little. His thoughts felt tangled. Triumph over the Minotaur mixed with guilt, exhaustion, and a new, sharp loneliness. Still, he knew a leader could not remain lost in grief. By midday, clouds gathered along the horizon, thick and rolling like dark wool. The wind changed direction, slapping the sails with sudden force. Theseus felt the shift immediately. A storm was forming. He ordered the crew to secure ropes, tighten the rigging, and prepare for a violent sea. The labyrinth had tested his body, but now the ocean would test his command. Waves rose, swelling with a deep, rumbling power. Thunder cracked across the sky as the tempest unfurled its fury. The vessel heaved violently, lifted and dropped by walls of water. Lightning stitched streaks of white across the clouds, illuminating the terrified faces of the youngest Athenians. Theseus steadied himself against the mast, shouting orders above the roar of the sea. The storm battered them from every direction, as if Poseidon himself resented their escape from Crete. Hours passed in chaos until the storm finally weakened, its rage dissolving into heavy rain. The survivors slumped across the deck, soaked and trembling but alive. Theseus exhaled slowly, letting relief wash over him. His leadership had held them together, but he felt the weight of each choice more heavily now. The sea had taken many lives before. He dared not let it take any more under his watch. When night fell, the wind softened. The ship drifted gently, guided by calmer currents. Theseus withdrew to a quiet corner near the stern, his thoughts returning once more to Ariadne. He wondered whether she had found peace in the sanctuary of Dionysus. The memory of her final smile lingered, sad yet determined. It reminded him that courage came in many forms, not all forged by battle. The next morning brought clearer skies and renewed spirits. The Athenians gathered on deck, speaking for the first time with optimism about returning home. Some imagined reuniting with their families, others dreamed of rebuilding their lives without fear of Crete's cruel tribute. Theseus listened, letting their hopes strengthen him. He needed their voices, needed to remember what all their suffering had been for. But as they sailed farther north, Theseus felt a faint anxiety tightening in his chest. His father, King Aegeus, had been promised a sign: black sails if Theseus perished, white if he returned victorious. In the chaos of the storm and the weight of his grief, Theseus had forgotten to replace the sails. The ship still bore the dark omen of death. He pushed the thought aside, promising to correct it soon. Days passed in relative peace, the sea now a placid stretch of blue. Dolphins raced along the ship's sides, leaping through the waves as though celebrating the Athenians' survival. The crew laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound light and unburdened. Theseus allowed himself a faint smile, though a small knot of unease remained. The journey home was nearing its end, and with it came responsibilities he could not delay. As Athens drew closer, familiar shorelines emerged, cliffs shaped by centuries of wind, olive trees scattered across gentle hills. The returning Athenians leaned over the rails, tears shining in their eyes. They had left as sacrifices, expecting never to return. Now they came back as survivors, bound together by shared terror and shared hope. Theseus felt pride swell within him, tempered by lingering sorrow. Yet the moment the Acropolis appeared in the distance, shining beneath the afternoon sun, Theseus's heart lurched. The black sails whipped in the wind, visible from miles away. He felt cold dread sink into his stomach. Quickly, he ordered, "Bring the sails down, replace them before the city sees." But the coastline was already far too close, and the lookout towers had sharp eyes. Theseus clenched his fists, knowing what the sight would mean. High upon the cliffs, King Aegeus stood watching the horizon. His hands gripped the stone railing as he searched for the familiar shape of his son's ship. When the dark sails came into view, all color drained from his face. Believing his son dead, Aegeus felt his heart shatter with unbearable despair. Without waiting for confirmation, he climbed onto the highest ledge, his grief blinding him to the world around him. The Athenians on board cheered with relief as their home grew enormous before them. But Theseus was frozen. A scream echoed faintly across the water, carried by the wind. He recognized the voice too late. As the ship glided closer, cries of horror spread along the shoreline. Theseus watched helplessly as a figure fell from the cliffs, disappearing into the crashing waves below. He felt the world tilt, crushed beneath the realization of what he had caused. Silence fell across the ship as it docked. The Athenians' triumph was suddenly hollow, eclipsed by the tragedy unfolding before them. Theseus staggered onto the pier, the weight of guilt heavier than any burden he had carried. He had defeated the Minotaur. He had saved his people, but in forgetting the sails, he had lost his father. No victory could erase the devastation carved into his heart. As the sun set over Athens, painting the sea with streaks of crimson, Theseus knew that his life had forever changed. He would ascend the throne, lead his city with strength and wisdom, and honor his father's memory. But beneath the crown would linger the quiet ache of regret, a reminder that even heroes could falter, and that courage often meant facing the consequences of their own mistakes. The city of Athens was quiet in the evening glow, streets empty as though mourning the tragedy alongside Theseus. Though the Athenians had returned safely, a shadow hung over every home and temple. The victory over the Minotaur had saved countless lives, but the price was etched deep into the heart of the city's prince. Theseus walked slowly, sword at his side, feeling the weight of survival pressed down on him like a physical burden. He entered the palace, his footsteps echoing across marble floors polished by generations of kings. Servants bowed quietly, sensing the gravity in his demeanor. The halls smelled faintly of olive oil and incense, yet no warmth reached him. Aegeus was gone, and the king's absence turned the familiar corridors into a hollow monument of what had been lost. Even the throne seemed colder, as if awaiting someone who could never fully replace the father who had fallen. Theseus sat on the steps of the throne room, his gaze fixed on the horizon visible through open arches. Memories of the labyrinth pressed into his mind, the twisting walls, the Minotaur's roar. The thread Ariadne gave him. He recalled the smell of damp stone, the echo of terror, and the small, desperate faces of his fellow Athenians. Every memory carried a lesson: courage, ingenuity, and the burden of choices made under fear. A messenger entered, bowing low before speaking. "My lord, the people await word of your deeds. Songs and stories spread already, though they speak more of triumph than loss." Theseus nodded slowly, feeling the irony in their joy. How could a city celebrate when he carried such a profound sorrow? Yet he understood that legends required celebration. The world remembered victories, not the silent grief behind them. He walked onto the balcony overlooking the Acropolis, seeing the Athenian citizens gathering below. Lanterns glimmered in the dusk, voices raised in praise. Theseus raised his hand in acknowledgement, though the weight of the crown pressed on his shoulders more heavily than ever. He understood now that leadership was a mixture of courage, wisdom, and enduring the loneliness that no sword or victory could pierce. In the quiet of the night, he thought again of Ariadne. The memory of her hand in Dionysus's remained vivid. The smile she had given him as she departed, a mixture of hope and farewell. Though she was gone, her courage and sacrifice lingered like a soft echo. Theseus realized that freedom sometimes demanded separation. Even the strongest bonds, forged in life and death struggle, could not prevent destiny from leading hearts along different paths. The king's advisors approached cautiously, bowing with respect yet uncertainty. They spoke of plans for rebuilding and fortifying the city, of alliances and celebrations, but Theseus hardly heard them. His mind traced the sequence of decisions, the moments where hesitation could have led to catastrophe, the times he had relied on instinct and courage. The city needed a ruler, and though sorrow pressed, he understood he must rise to meet it. That night, he wandered the palace gardens alone, listening to the soft rustle of olive trees and the distant lap of the sea. Stars reflected in the still water, and the world seemed immense, as though his life were only one thread among countless destinies. He remembered the labyrinth, the Minotaur, the narrow passages, and the scent of victory and blood mingled together. Life had offered him triumph, yet reminded him how fragile human existence remained. In the days that followed, Theseus took the throne with quiet dignity. Citizens celebrated the return of their heroes, yet the prince carried his grief privately. Songs were sung of the Minotaur's defeat, but he remembered the faces of the fallen and the cost behind the glory. Every decision from this day forward would carry the weight of responsibility, tempered by the lessons of fear, bravery, and sacrifice that the labyrinth had imparted. And so, Theseus's story became legend, a hero who faced the darkness, defeated a monster, and bore the burden of survival. He understood that courage was not merely slaying beasts, but facing consequences, honoring sacrifices, and living with choices that would shape the lives of many. The Minotaur was gone, Ariadne had found her path, and Athens was free, yet the memory of loss would echo in his heart forever, shaping the man he had become. Theseus stood on the cliffs overlooking the Aegean Sea, the wind tugging at his hair as the sun dipped low, painting the waves in shades of gold and crimson. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the dark twists of the labyrinth, the monstrous roar of the Minotaur, the perilous decisions that weighed heavily on his soul. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of his life, woven with courage, sacrifice, and sorrow. Though the monster was vanquished, the labyrinth's lessons lingered. He had faced fear not merely with strength but with wisdom, understanding that brute force alone could never secure true victory. Ariadne had shown him that courage and trust could shape destinies as powerfully as any sword. Yet her absence reminded him that even heroes must accept loss, and that freedom often came at the cost of separation. Athens welcomed him as a savior, a prince who had carried his people through terror and returned triumphant. Songs were sung of his valor, children whispered his name in wonder, and statues would later rise in his honor. But Theseus knew that true heroism was measured not in accolades, but in the quiet acceptance of responsibility, in the endurance of grief, and in the choices made when the outcome was uncertain. Standing there, he gazed at the horizon and made a silent vow, to lead Athens with justice and courage, to protect the innocent, and to honor the memory of those lost along the way. The Minotaur's shadow, Ariadne's smile, and the labyrinth's dark corridors would remain in his heart forever, guiding him, reminding him, shaping him into a ruler worthy of legend. And so the hero's story endured, of a young prince who faced monsters, defied fate, and learned that the greatest triumphs were often tempered by sacrifice. His deeds would echo across generations, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of courage in the face of overwhelming darkness.